hoping they would, search outside and bring some new blood in to the university. Unfortunately, the dean at that time, whose name was Arthur Fritchell, he took the money and the position and appointed an ex-football coach who hated coaching and hated teaching even worse to be the new chair. And this guy was a heavy drinker, heavy smoker, and so it didn't bode well, for the health promotion movement. And so Bob, the first thing this new chair did was he took away Bob Bowen's summer teaching responsibilities. And Bob needed that because he had 6 kids and lived on a farm, and it was the first time in 17 years that he had not been given summer teaching. So it was a major economic shock to him. And he took my locker from the locker room.
Your locker?
Claiming that they needed it. And I can verify that locker sat empty for the next 8 years because I checked every week, But so anyway, Bob was unemployed, and this happened in April when he found out he wasn't going to get his summer teaching that he expected. So he came over to the health center and he asked if I had any positions, and I said, no, we don't need people in the summer. There's very few students around in summer. But I said, let me think about it. I'll come up with something. And of course I remembered we had done those little workshops for teachers, and I said, Bob, I think this wellness stuff's going to take off. Why don't we run a national conference this year? You could be the director of the conference, and you'd have a job. And I was heading off to Frost Valley that summer to do research on kids and play, and I came back on Wednesday of the conference, and I was more shocked than anybody. There were 250 people here from all over the country. Now, the story about how we got all those people here is pretty interesting because we didn't know anybody. We were nobodies. I read about all these people around the country, like Hans Diehl from the Pritikin program, and Herbert Benson from Harvard, and some fancy nutrition guy from Chicago. And I called all of them that day and asked them if they would come and present at the 3rd annual Wellness Promotion Strategies Conference. And they all said yes. And then we had hall directors who helped organize the conference then, the detail work. And over the years, it just kept growing. So that's the truth. So thank God for a heavy drinking, heavy smoking chair.
Decided that you guys were it.
We kind of set the stage for some of this. We'd been working within all of us. There were 3 people who ended up taking the major direction.
I apologize. I know you guys think we know who all you are, and I know I've seen you, and I've probably even been introduced at some point.
I'm Bill Hetler. I'm the director of the health service here.
Okay.
I have cards. I'm also the current president of the board of the Institute.
Okay.
Everybody have one who wants one?
Institutionalized? Okay.
Pardon me?
Good time, Judd. Hi, Judd. Yeah. Jack, do you want to talk about who you are?
Pick up.
You go ahead. You guys talk.
Oh, okay.
Say your name and pick up the story.
I know you worked here, but...
Yeah.
I'm Dennis Elsenrath, and in those days I was director of our counseling center.
Okay.
And then the third person who we really eventually became the core of moving things forward was Fred Liefgren, and he was the assistant chancellor for student affairs. And Bill and I actually reported to him, and he's a psychologist also. And so, he's part of the conference here. He's been coming, and he always does. He presents and so forth. But if we go back to when Bill first came here, he had gotten out of the Air Force shortly before that and wrote this really nifty, lengthy letter about what kind of position he was searching for. And the director of the health center at that time brought it down. We had a nice working relationship. We were one end of the hall from the other. And I read this, and it was really interesting. And he was talking about wanting to do prospective health. And his dream, this is Bill's dream, of not only treating patients or clients with illness and so forth, but this is a rich opportunity to educate and to install attitudes and lifestyle behaviors that would serve them well for the rest of their lives, and that it was a mistake if we didn't do that. Well, we were very receptive to that, because the kind of orientation, and Mike has the same counseling psych, and so does Craig, have the same counseling psych orientation. It's a very developmental model in that you take people wherever they are, You don't necessarily have to categorize them as ill. The counseling program I came out of was not a pathology-oriented program at all. Not at all. It was really take people wherever they are and move them forward. You recognize some people really do have serious illness, but that wasn't the focus. And so when Bill wrote that letter, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so then he did come to the Hill Center, and then as time went on, we started working on more and more programs together, doing groups together, conferring with one another, ultimately working on an assessment tool together. He drafted the first one, and then starting the second edition, we really snazzed it up and expanded it, and we spent lots of afternoons together just talking about what do we want in this dimension of wellness and things of that sort. So all of that groundwork was really being laid, and then comes along the workshop and what we called the third national conference sort of thing. So that was the backdrop for. I always look at that as really getting ready.
Let's go back one step further. This campus had a president in the 60s named James Albertson, and Albertson had the philosophy that a university should not only teach whatever the majors are, but it should teach people how to live their lives successfully. And he hired people who believed what he believed. And what one of his colleagues told me, he said, why hire people that are going to argue with you? Hire people who already are believing what you believe, and it makes your life easier. And so Denny and a bunch of others were in that generation. And I was kind of like third generation of people, because I was hired by Denny and his friends. And it was such a wonderful environment. We met weekly as a staff, and we would help each other get things done. There was none of this competitive stuff that exists on most campuses. Like one of my mentors when I started out in college health, he wrote a paper once called The Invisible War, and it was about what really is going on university campuses and how people undermine and impede each other's success. We had none of that here. I mean, if they needed something and we had some staff that could help, they would go help, and vice versa. I mean, it was just a wonderful environment.
What was the date you came here?
I came here in September of 72.
72.
And I had 60 job offers that year. So I came here because of the philosophy that these guys had already started here. So.
And I came here in 1965 as a residence hall director, and in those days, that was part of student life. The president of the university interviewed all residence hall directors, along with all the faculty applicants, and we were hiring about 100 people per year in those days. But he communicated to each of us that philosophy that Bill talks about. So his sense was there should be no separation between the student life staff or any other staff on campus and what goes on in the classroom. It's all about learning. It's all about developing students. So that philosophy was deeply embedded here before I came.
Is it still here at this campus?
Not as strongly,
but tuned as it was, but it's still here. It's very hard because some of us are still alive. It's hard for them to get rid of that.
They're trying. And the other thing that happened along the way I want to mention is critical. We didn't know what to call what we were doing. And so we were talking about prospective medicine. We had lifestyle improvement programs and these sorts of notions. And Bill somehow made connection with both Jack and Dawn, Jack Travis and Dawn Ordell, and they came to campus. And I remember you, Dawn, working with the Student Health Advisory Committee.
I came in the dead of winter.
Okay.
Before I came to the summertime.
And then he came back again, too. That's amazing.
Jack and I remember sitting on the floor at a conference in San Diego, just talking about, our ideas. And I felt, fantastic. Here's this guy that I could resonate with these ideas, and I don't remember what year that was, but I'm going to look it up.
It was 76, I'm
pretty
sure, yeah.
76?
Well, I came into it also through prospective medicine, and it was in 1971. I was running a multiphasic screening clinic for the Public Health Service in my residency at Johns Hopkins, and my advisor, I went to Kaiser Permanente that had a multiphasic screening center in Oakland, Maury Collin had, and it was a big experiment of, is multiphasic screening worth the cost? And they didn't know, so they were doing it, testing it. And I got to sit in an office that belonged to Sidney Garfield, who was the co-founder of Kaiser and retired, and he only came in once a month. And my advisor had a desk in there too, and there was this weird book on the shelf called How to Practice Prospective Medicine. I kept looking at the thing, I look at it, what is this? It just was a 90-degree tilt.
It was this big.
done on a typewriter with a spiral binding.
It would open like that far out.
And it was mainly tables of numbers, but the opening part was this philosophy of computing people's risk of dying based on life insurance tables. And I took that idea back to my boss in Baltimore, who said, "Oh, here," and he handed me the proceedings of the 8th annual meeting that was a collection of presentations that people done. It had already been going 8 years at that point, and that really lit me up. So I went to Indianapolis, where Louis Robbins, the founder of this, was, and hung out with him. I lived nearby in Ohio, so I just went over for a couple days, and we were climbing the stairs together, and he was this wiry little guy. He was just a ball of energy, and he became a mentor for me. And at that point,
5'2", by the way.
Oh, really?
Louis was 5'2".
He knew Halbert Dunn, who will come up in a minute. But he was doing them on desk calculators and magic markers to score these health risk appraisals, and you had to mail them in to have them done. And I was working with a computer system for our multiphasic screening. It was a huge room with 3 computers, a total of 12 kilobytes of memory in each one. My K-Pro had more memory than that room.
Yeah.
But I said, this thing would lend itself to computerization. And there was a guy in San Diego, do you remember his name, that had a computerized version, but it was a big jumble of numbers. So I had the idea to take Robbins' bar graph that he was doing with colored markers and do it on the computer. And so that was my entry into that in '73. But also in '72, I picked up a book on the clearance table at the Hopkins Medical Bookstore called High Level Wellness by Halbert Dunn, who I mentioned earlier. And it was a collection of of talks he gave at a church, and I think some on the radio, a Unitarian church around Washington, D.C. I thought it was in Silver Spring, but Miller thinks it was Alexandria, so we don't know, somewhere around there. And it was, $2, best $2 I ever spent. I took it home, I started reading it. I thought wellness was a stupid word and it would never catch on, but the ideas kind of resonated.
State your name for the record.
Yeah. Thank you, I forgot that. I'm John Travis. Can dub that. So that gave me the idea of this idea of putting all this stuff together. And I spent 3 years and finished my residency, and I had 2 more years payback time to the Public Health Service. I tried to sell it to the Park Lawn building. It's the Pentagon of the Public Health Service. I got great compliments, but no money. I went to Ashland, Oregon. I talked to the doctors there. Nah, we're already doing preventive medicine, thank you. And so I finished out my 2 years. I did training in New York City. I rode the train up from Baltimore in bioenergetics, and I got biofeedback equipment, and I was in transactional analysis group therapy training, getting these tools to how to work with people, because I didn't get anything useful in med school, and moved out to Mill Valley in 1975. Promptly met Don. I hadn't even gotten the center open at that point, and we did a workshop, or I did a workshop, you came to it. And had you read Dunn, or you knew about Dunn? You were one of the few other living people.
You should know that. You were on my doctoral committee.
Well, that, but I don't remember whether you had read it beforehand or not. I remember what's his name in Berkeley.
I don't remember exactly when I read it.
Yeah.
I'll get to it.
And so I was doing this wellness center, and then Don became my pimp, basically. He writes.
That's honorable enough.
If he's my pimp, does that make me? So we hit it off, and he's running around the country. He's the extrovert, I'm the introvert. And then I met Bill in San Diego at this conference, and I'm going to pass it on to Don for equal time.
Oh, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the
Don Ardell,
inspired. Yeah, Don Ardell. It's inspired by John and Halbert Dunn's book, and I was actually getting academic credits for doing all this. While at the time I was executive director of the Bay Area Health Planning Council. That was my real job, and I was editor of the Health Planning Journal, which I had started. And I was recruiting people like John and a doctor named Duell at UC Berkeley and other people, Leland Kaiser, to write articles about wellness and planning in the Health Planning Journal and introducing wellness to the field of health planning. which existed in every metropolitan area through the Partnership for Health Planning Funds, a big congressional budget program. It was a great vehicle for wellness before really this got started here. We had at least a third of the health planning agencies, every metropolitan area had them, that was in some way exploring the idea of actually doing something to make the populations in their area live healthier lifestyles, which was a dramatic change, because basically all health planning agencies were doing up to that time was playing the power game of who gets new bed facilities, new hospital wings, that sort of thing, and federal money for that. And I was trying to move them in this other direction. But anyway, I ran into a brick wall after a while. The feds cut it off, said, stop doing this. It's not your charge. You need to do certificates of need. So I just basically got that job and went to Stanford and started working on a doctorate, which I finished elsewhere in Ohio. But I had to get a committee and make this respectable. So I got to pick people around the country, and Leland Kaiser and John Travis and a number of other people were on that committee, and they reviewed what I was writing. And meanwhile, I was working on this doctorate, which Rodale Press said they would publish. And they asked me if I had anything at the time, and all I had was a chapter. And the chapter was about this doctor in Mill Valley who wouldn't see sick people, just wanted to see healthy people, which was an idea that they just amazing. We can sell magazines with this idea. So I wrote an article. It was published in Prevention called "Meet John Travis, Doctor of Wellbeing," and that helped your business, I think.
Yeah, we got like 1,500 letters as a result of it.
Yeah. And it gave legitimacy to the idea of what I was doing with the faculty people, the actual faculty people. They thought, gee, there must be something to this. So anyway, that dissertation was picked up by Rodale and became the book, High Level Wellness and Alternative to Doctors, Drugs, and Disease.
Which my soon-to-be wife read in Australia and came to the States to study with our program, and we met 28 years later and a 14-year-old daughter, thanks to Don's book.
Wow. Well, I think the book also got me invited to Stevens Point, to get back to where we are here, in the middle of the winter, to run around in the freezing cold with a bunch of kids. And I stayed at Bill's house the first night. I got in late. And I maybe this is invented memory or something, but it seemed to me there was a horse in your backyard. Is that possible?
I had, at one point, I had 5 horses.
5 horses. There were 2, I think, at the time. But anyway.
I'm happy I survived that stage of my life.
I love the initial conferences coming here. You can talk about anything you had in your mind about wellness, and then it was pretty physical from my own standpoint. I mean, obviously, it was, the orientation was fitness and stress management and nutrition. And then that really was, and then there was, of course, all the kind of holistic stuff and spirituality and the like. And then I have to confess, put it on the record, my initial motives in coming here also were to meet women. And I'm still interested in that, and I'm still interested in that, but with different intentions. So we all evolve. Who would like to go next?
Don, what was that Asilomar conference? Where,
Oh, yeah. Right.
Lee Kaiser.
Yeah,
you put that
I put on a number of conferences for health planners about wellness. And so I had to bring in people who knew something about wellness, and I brought in Jack Travis and Leland Kaiser and Dr. Fink, remember him?
Don Fink.
Donald Fink, and a number of other characters who were writing interesting things or doing innovative things. And it really sparked some interest. I mean, I had about 5 of them, 3 in Asilomar and 2 in our area. And then it was time to get on, and I was finishing my program then. You were doing the conferences, and there was no point in continuing with that. But those were fun.
You don't remember when you and Bill first met?
Well, I came here and met Bill right here in the winter.
Can't remember.
You called me, is what I remember. You called me and said, "Come on, we come in and talk to our faculty." This was first. This was before Frost Valley, because I remember asking you. I was thinking, why isn't this guy at Harvard, or Princeton or something like that? And you gave me your vision statement. I thought, I wonder if anything's going to come of this. That would be really cool.
But then another piece of it was Bob Allen, who I think you brought into the loop.
Yes.
Too.
Well, I met Bob because of how did I meet Bob? I don't remember how I met Bob. He might have contacted me when the book came out, but it seemed it was sooner than that. But I don't remember.
No, he was in the book. So.
Oh, he was. Don't remember that. I'll ask Judd about it.
Judd's right there.
Oh, Judd, do you know how your dad and I connected?
I'm sorry, I don't know the details of that.
I can't
I'll
remember.
look back through my records and find that
Yeah.
out for you. I think Bob got involved somehow with prospective medicine early on, and one year I was elected president, and Bob was there that year and the year before that, so it could have been that.
Is that the one in San Francisco at the old
No.
Jack Tar?
No, I think it was the one at the Don Cesar Hotel down in St. Pete Beach. And
I wasn't there.
Judd showed some pictures this morning of Frost Valley.
That was 1977. We
Yeah.
started. That's exactly 30 years ago.
yeah, so your dad was engaged with us before that,
Yeah.
and he had.
I know how he got started in wellness. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
This is my interpretation, and of course he could have.
Name for that.
My name is Judd Allen. I'm Robert Allen's son, and my dad had a couple of things going on in his life that got him interested in wellness. One was that he had two sons who were runners and wanted to spend a lot of time with us, and he was a smoker and overweight and not really that health oriented. And so, but he was interested enough in what he was going to do with us to make some changes. And at the same time, he had a couple of clients who had a big interest in wellness. Johnson & Johnson and Hoffman LaRoche and Control Data, not simultaneously, but I think Hoffman LaRoche and Johnson & Johnson simultaneously said to my dad, "You're helping us in organizational development. Why don't you help us with wellness?" And it had a lot to do with the CEOs being real health-oriented people, athletic, and not wanting to have a company that missed all that fun. And so I think my dad started to do some research, and I think he came across Don's work, and I agree, it was that Society of Prospective Medicine that was early. He published in that some of the early issues, and I think that they were his first articles on the subject, and so there must have been connections there. So that's my recollection as best I know it.
Michael, would you check if it's still recording?
Yeah, it appears to be. Yep.
Is that the end of the...
Hi, I'm Craig Washington, and this was back in 77 or 78 when I started, as a result of my work with men's work in Virginia. And I got to meet this guy in a workshop, David Emmerling, who ultimately became the director of the National Wellness Institute. And in the first year that he was here, he invited me to come up and speak. And so it was that introduction out of mental health, from my counseling psychology background, that I ended up coming here. And I said, wellness? I said, how can I contribute to wellness? You know, it was kind of strange to me. I wasn't really familiar with the concept. So it came up, and I did 2 presentations that year. I've since presented here, you know, over the last, I think I've been here now 24 years. So not one of the original, but certainly quickly found this as a great place and home to be, and a wonderful place to promote health and wellness, men's health, access, all kinds of other issues that we've struggled with over the years. I became, I believe, the first African American on the Board of Trustees, then became the first African American on the board, and also had an opportunity to actually be the executive director for the National Wellness Institute for a short period. So just really great opportunities here, and fit quite well with my early desires to be into hospital administration and public health, which I never actually got to do, even though I was accepted at Johns Hopkins to do the program. It was at a time when programs were done during the day, and I had to work. With family and kids, so you know how that is. So I've done it other ways, and so this has always been an avocation for me. So my involvement is still alive and well, and I marvel at the young man next to me, my elder statesman here, who's just absolutely, through the fitness rage that we all went through, it has just been incredible. But I've seen the conference move from being so fitness oriented. I remember running through Smeekley Park and doing all those races and having all kinds of activities in the cafeteria. There was a time here where wellness food was just incredible. It really was wellness food. It was very different from what we're experiencing today. And so there's the food. It was, I think at the time, because as John is saying, they were more into nutrition, sports, and those kinds of things. I think the food, the focus on food, caused it to be very fresh, a lot of fruit orientation, a lot of really healthy stuff. It was just no question. I remember Bill doing some of his presentations early, when he would talk about the third day. After the third day, you hear everybody is running to the bathroom, everybody is making very loud noises in the restroom. I mean, it was hilarious. But the grains and nutritions, the wheat, the barley, everything. Oh, yes.
There was one night in what's now the Allen Center where we had a catered dinner with candles, and I think there was wine served.
Oh yeah, wine was served. There was an issue about wine being served even.
Yeah, it was an elegant evening.
A vegetarian can eat very easily.
Easily.
You have 15 fruits to choose from.
Yeah.
And then Bill would, or somebody from the dining hall.
The dining hall gave
tell us
the
about
fiber
all
report.
And all the pounds, tons
How
of
many-
all the stuff we'd been eating.
And
That was always hilarious.
a couple of years they had to issue a fiber alert to the sewage department.
That was one of Bill's favorite lines.
I always remember, Bill, when you did the thing with the toothbrush and passed out toothbrushes. I still have that red toothbrush.
That is just incredible.
It's amazing. That's, 20 years old, and I still use it.
What he would do is stand in front of the whole group during introductions, and without saying a word, he would stand there brushing his teeth.
Right up into the microphone.
Yeah.
He also did a Green Gallagher routine for the talent show where he would have multiple hands feeding him all his junk.
Yeah.
Some kind of alien doing spine.
Oh, right.
But his message was really a cultural norm message, because he would say, how many of you out there think this is a little on the weird side?
Yes.
And everybody would raise their hands, and he'd say, no, that's back when smoking was much more prevalent. And so then he'd say, well, how many of you would think it's abnormal if I took this little white stick and I put it in my mouth and I lit it up and I sucked in and then I blew out a bunch of smoke? How many of you would think that's abnormal? And he was really raising consciousness about, well, let's take another look at these things. Yeah.
I think I still remember the line. It was unburned carcinogenous gases.
I remember yellow brown scum.
Yeah, yellow brown scum.
That's what I remember. It's funny. Rick Bellingham, who was involved in corporate health, he and I were actually thrown out of a restaurant in Morristown, New Jersey, because we were brushing our teeth, and the people next to us complained that we had offended them, and they were smoking, and we were brushing our teeth. And if I had more money in my pocket, I would have stayed there and fought it just for the publicity. But I was afraid I'd miss my plane.
Tossed out for breastfeeding.
How about your airport story, Bill? Go ahead and tell the camera. Running through, the guy wanted to know about your credentials while you were helping.
Oh God, yes. One time in Chicago, I used to make slideshows and just from common everyday events that you see, and I always had a camera with me, and they had installed these new golf cart-sized ambulances in O'Hare, and I had a few minutes between flights, so I ran down and I asked this EMT, I said, can I get a picture of your cart? Because I love to give talks about how progressive, I pretended to say, our medical establishment is. And he said, okay. And I said, can you turn on all the lights and everything and make it look real? And just then the phone rang. And he ran in and he said, I'm sorry, mister, I got to go. And I said, well, I'm a doctor. You want me to go with you? He says, you're not allowed on this cart. And I said, well, where is it, as he took off? And he said, H4. I took off running. I beat him to the scene. And there's a guy kneeling down already, and he was kind of looking at him. And I started checking the guy's vital signs, and this guy says, get out of the way, I'm a doctor. and I had T-shirt, running shoes, I said, well, I'm a doctor too. And the guy says, well, where'd you go to med school? And I said, I tried to look good, and I said, I went to the University of Cincinnati. I said, where'd you go to med school? And he says, he had a three-piece suit on. I went to Loyola. And then at that moment, a nurse comes up. She said, hey, you guys, we better do something. This man's in trouble. And
That's kind of a metaphor for healthcare in America.
yes.
It should have been in sicko.
Yeah. Well,
Eventually, the EMT did get there, though.
to spread it out a little bit, I met Michael at a conference in Milwaukee, and why don't you say a few things about that? Because we sat in the car for a couple hours.
Oh yeah. I remember you telling me that I was an introvert that was faking it pretty well as an extrovert, or something like that.
Projecting my own self.
Yes, yeah, a lot in common actually there. Now I came here in 1979 to the conference, to the Health Promotion Strategies Conference. That would have been what, the second one?
No,
third?
It would have been about third one.
Third one, because about the third one. Because the Vice President for Student Affairs at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where I worked, my name's Mike Orlowski, by the way. I was working as a counseling psychologist at the counseling center there. He had gone, another vice president that he knew had gone, and he kind of thought, well, this is going to be all the rage in student affairs, so I got to get a couple of my guys up there. So he sent me and the director of the health service to come up here and bring wellness back to the campus. And because I had been very involved in an outreach model for counseling centers, where instead of just sitting there and waiting for all the people to come in with all their problems, that we would really be involved in creating programs that would reach out all across campus and spread the idea of, positive mental health and all that kind of thing, and help people with real problems that were really real for them. And because of that, I was invited to go. And we did bring back the HRA, and I remember how funny it was trying to get college students to care about an HRA report, that said, if you do all these things, you'll live 5 years longer, and when you're 20 years old, that doesn't cut very much, motivation for you. But we got very involved with that, created a residence hall that was devoted just to wellness, and really set up a real community-based idea there. Really selected our RAs very carefully the second year. When we just laid it all on them the first year, it was disastrous. But we really got involved with that, and as I got more involved in the wellness field, I got very involved in the environmental dimension of wellness, and seeing how the way our lifestyles contributed to environmental difficulties or made it better, and also how contact with the natural world really could affect our own personal growth, our health, and our well-being. And John's referring to this small conference in Milwaukee that was on spirituality and wellness. The entire conference was devoted to that.
And it was pretty radical in those days to even use the S word.
Yeah, I remember it was really new and different to think of it that way, and yet a lot of us saw that as the essence of holism. You had to bring in every aspect of a person. And I started presenting here in '82 and have presented here, over 25 times since then on various topics, some of them related to the environment, some of them related to stress management. And in the last several years, I'm not sure just when I started doing it, but talking about marrying the fields of coaching and wellness, because it seemed like more and more wellness was being individualized. People needed individual skills, and I'd gotten very involved and gotten certified in the field of personal professional coaching. So I really got years is bringing that to the conference, and now, you know, we've gone from, you know, one program to, I believe, George Rogers from the ICF said we had 99 hours that would qualify as coach training here at the conference this year, which is really astonishing. So I hope more and more people will seek that kind of training and not just say, well, you know, I'm a health educator and now what I do is called coaching. I hope they'll embrace that model, learn more from it, and how it can make their job easier. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Working into Meg. No, well, not so ancient. Well, while this was going on, while Ardell was successfully pimping me and we were doing these conferences, I burned out eventually in running a center. I tried to do a freestanding center without insurance in Mill Valley, and found that people just weren't willing to pay for wellness. And I had a staff of 13 at one point. We had biofeedback, nutrition, personal image consulting, you name it, we did it. And it just, I had to make up the deficit by going out and doing speaking gigs that Ardell had a lot to do with my getting. But I burned out in 1980, and we decided to close the center it was actually 79, right after we got filmed for 60 Minutes. And I met my wife, and then we moved to Costa Rica, and I thought, I've had it, this is it. We also had the manuscript for the Wellness Workbook at the publishers, and it came out in 81. We came back and sold them here at the conference out of the back of our Volkswagen camper in an outdoor booth, as I recall, over across the street.
We didn't get our share of that year.
Share of what? No, we...
With interest?
It's like that AT&T stock that, you know, got buried.
Yeah. So eventually we came back from Costa Rica, and our experience running these weekend workshops is people would come and get lit up, and we'd create a community, and they'd have this wonderful experience, and they attributed it to what we talked about, and I realized it wasn't that. It was that we brought them together to talk about anything real, and people would open up and connect. And so they would go home and crash and burn, we heard over and over again. So I had the idea, could we create a network of helping professionals that could support each other in creating a culture where they lived and bring other people in, and we could help them facilitate creating circles. And it was a great idea, probably the time before it was ready to come. And that's how I met Meg. And I remember you came here to present, and you had a quotes, fundamentalist Christian in the back of the room, or heckling you. And we were sitting in the dorm room, and you were close to tears about being heckled. And I was saying, it's probably good, you know.
Like me.
Huh?
I do remember that. I do. Gosh, that was. But I kind of. I had an earlier entry. This is Meg Jordan, and what was it? What were we doing? I think we were milling in Mill Valley together before that. Yeah, I think we had a Shadow Circle group. When was that?
That was in Sebastopol, I think.
Was that Sebastopol? Maybe, oh boy, this is a menopause brain talking here now. Then there was. I kind of came into this through a side door, though, of being an ICU, CCU nurse and starting cardiac rehab in LA, and being completely inspired by Paul Ribisol's work. Remember Paul Ribisol? He was out at Chapel Hill. So he was one of these cardiologist types that said, enough of this. Where's the wellness picture in the whole cardiac disease thing? And that's what I jumped on that bandwagon. But then with you, it was through work with Elaine and you and Mary Lee and all that group.
Well, the whole
Where were we?
Soup thing in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if we met then. I met Elaine there.
Yeah, that was
You were
1980.
there,
80 to 85, Campbell Soup sponsored what they considered some leaders in American health, fitness, wellness, nutrition.
American Health Promotion.
Oh, you're talking about Lake Louise?
Lake Louise.
Yeah, I was up there. Sure.
Yeah.
That's how I learned.
We were all there. We met all of you there. And we made masks and played in the woods, and they sponsored 5 years worth of our coming together.
I went for 4 years.
Did you?
Yep.
4 years.
4 years. We went 5 years.
But quite a
Dick
network
Keeler.
came out of that, as you described. I wasn't aware of.
Oh, huge. I think the first African American health conference, the first senior health conference, we counted how many, Love and I counted about 17 offshoots from those 5 years funded by Campbell Soup, believe it or not. And we even talked Campbell Soup into creating low-salt soups. And they found they had to grow their own vegetables because celery and carrots have a natural amount of sodium. And so they had to grow special vegetables to qualify for low-sodium soup. Anyway, it was all fascinating stuff that came through that. The Lake Louise years. Anybody else want to contribute? You remember that?
You know, this is Judd Allen again. I spoke a little bit about my dad, and I should say that today was a delightful day for me. It was in some ways bittersweet. It was the 30th anniversary of my learning about wellness, mostly at the Frost Valley YMCA, where Bill had a medical role there, and then expanded it to a wellness camp. And I was lucky enough, although I didn't feel that lucky at the start, for my dad to invite me to be a camp counselor, which was a little bit foreign to me, seeing I wasn't exactly a camper. So, but I went, and Don Ardell was there, and Jack Travis, and Bill Hetler, and my dad, and Walt Schaefer. Who was there? Was another fellow who Dick Schaefer. Dick Schaefer, and
principal of a high school.
And we had a rather developing concept of wellness at that point, because there a lot of emphasis on the physical aspects, although some emphasis on relationships, that was nice, and some emphasis on enjoying each other's company. But I was really taken by the wellness idea. At first, I was a little angry at my dad because I felt that it was a distraction from his community change and organizational development work. That we were working on a book about community, and I felt that his culture change principles could solve problems of world peace and environmental care and a lot of things, and I didn't quite understand how this health and fitness thing really was going to fit into that mix. But I was a radical young man in college at that point, so I would harass my dad on a whole lot of things. One of his big clients at the time was the Westinghouse, and they were building nuclear generators and marketing them around the world. And my first response to wellness was, you get those guys all to run around their nukes. And so, as anyone who hears a good idea and it comes from your dad, at first you resist. And later you say, that's a good idea. And before I knew it, I became as interested in this subject as he was. And when he died, I really had to fill his role a bit. And I remember, here comes my daughter Morgan. I may have to pass the buck here. Hey, say hello to everyone. Okay. I was just telling a story, Morgan, about your grandpa, my dad. But when he died, I had to give several talks that he had scheduled to do. And that was a very hard thing for me emotionally. I really loved my dad and I missed him. And it was fun, though, because people like Don and Bill and Denny and Jack and all the people in this circle that I've spoken would come up to me and say, I just loved your dad and thought he was special, and tell me stories about him. So in many ways, my early wellness experience combined getting in touch with the loss of my dad and coming to this conference now for the 20 years since my dad's death, combined a time for mourning and dealing with that, but being among friends and learning and sharing. And I'm just so grateful that the conference and the people involved in the conference were receptive to me making a contribution, because it was pretty unclear, other than being the son of Robert Allen, that I had what it took to share things. And you guys let me present on pretty much whatever subject I had in mind, and were very generous about it. But I always had a little bit of an extra interest in culture that made it a little bit unique and maybe worth hearing. And so some year I even presented on spirituality. You got to go with your group, Morgan? Okay. But my take on it was, what is our culture doing to allow for spirituality? But it was very generous of the conference to let me go out of my comfort zone often and try my latest and greatest ideas. So I always feel so grateful to the National Wellness Institute, but to the people here for being so supportive of me, because I haven't always been an emotional rock, given that I kind of manage the grieving and the learning all at the same time.
That really moves me. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I was hoping you'd have a chance to. I was hoping you'd have a chance to speak about your own contribution as well. So really appreciate that. And you know, that has been something about the conference that certainly I've experienced, the idea of being able to grow professionally. Golly, you know, when I look at how what I was into, what I was presenting on, where my thoughts were about wellness in 1982 and 1989 and where they are now, just had a growth and that development. It was just a tremendous learning experience, and one that allowed me to really grow personally, to really define and clarify how I could really make a unique contribution. And very few, if any, conferences out there otherwise that I know about, do anything like that, that allow professionals to grow and develop. I think one of the strengths here has always been this turnover, but also this regularity of presenters that have come back and continue to make valuable contributions. And, a lot of people, Bob Zimble, Izzy Gazelle, just on and on and on. We could name so many people that maybe haven't been board members, but Don Tubasing, yeah, been here year after year after year and made just tremendous, contributions to the whole movement, really, as well as the whole conference.
Yeah.
I'd like to know. So you've watched things evolve over all these years, and it's really interesting to hear. I'm Terry Jessen. One of the questions I have, though, from each of you is, where do you think we're heading, and is it in the right direction? So if you don't think we're headed in the right direction, where would you like it to be going? Haha, we've got the hands up.
I asked that question within 10 minutes of Bob's presentation. I think it was at the end of the conference that week. And we walked outside and we were kind of saying goodbye because we wouldn't see each other until next summer, I guess, or unless something came up that year. And I thought Bob had kind of hit the apex, at the top of the mountain, sort of, with a wonderful talk. Everybody's feeling good about it. I said, "What's next, Bob? What happens after this? Where do you see we're going?" And as I recall, he was saying, "Don, we're just getting started. We don't know, but it should be pretty interesting." And that was it. That was the last. But I think where we're going is connecting wellness to the issues of the day. I think that's one of the best ways to grow the movement, and that's why we need to get away from being a medical idea, a health issue largely, and become a philosophy, a mindset, an attitude towards life and towards the kind of issues that are so prevalent in the newspapers every day. There's a wellness perspective on almost everything, on movies, on books, on the things that the candidates are talking about in the presidential sweepstakes on both parties. I think there's a wellness perspective to the issues that has to do with living a life in a positive way, being reinforcing personal responsibility, the legitimacy of seeking joy and contributing to other people, and morality and common decencies. These are all the wellness issues that I think will excite people who aren't interested necessarily in wellness as a health issue because they're overweight or have a medical issue of some kind. Doesn't mean we can't still promote wellness within the old context that we've known in the early days, but I really think that it becomes a philosophy of living your life and dealing with the challenges that will make it really grow, make us all better in terms of advanced well-being, higher health status, and more satisfaction with life, exuberance, and the use of reason.
I kind of look at what's happening right now as the 100th monkey. And in the early days, and my first talk on wellness was in 1978 out of the local community. I was out for a National Directors of Counseling Conference in the coast of Oregon. And I did a breakout session. I remember submitting my program proposal, and the committee chair called me and she said, "What is wellness?" She'd never heard of it before. I explained it, and she said, "That sounds really interesting." So I got on the program. I had a breakout session of 40 psychologists, counseling center directors from around the country. So I started that talk by saying, how many of you have ever heard the term wellness? And 4 out of 40 raised their hands. 1978. So that kind of...
That's high, actually.
Yeah, probably so. But they were, university faculty, so they would be more prone. So yeah, they were more likely. I suppose the general population would have been less than 1%. So, and what Dawn's comments is where I was going to go with this, in the sense that you can't pick up a paper or listen to the news for any length of time now that you don't hear somewhere wellness. So it's really ingrained. So it's really ingrained in society. Now the challenge, which Dawn also keeps pointing out, is we need to really do a better job of defining that, and that's coming. I think it really is coming. We're working on those kinds of things. And today in the international program, there was a sense that wellness is bound to mean something a little bit different in each culture. It almost has to. Yet, if you look at the World Health Organization definition from 1947, it was really in many ways a precursor for wellness. It wasn't entirely there, but it certainly had the core dimensions. And that has stood the test of international examination, if you will.
Famous phrase, it's more than the absence of disease.
Yeah, and they were really looking at it in their own language as a biopsychosocial model. In other words, a multidimensional model of health and understanding health and illness. So I think, and I was really pleased in that session today. There must have been 60 or 80 or more people show up for that session from all these different countries. And that, to me, is really another 100th monkey example, that it's not just the United States, but the world is coming on board. Tipping point. Okay. So I don't know exactly where this is going to end up, but I'm pretty confident that people are jumping on board and they're recognizing. In this country, it's because of economics, but in other countries, it's because people want to be healthier.
Jack Travis again. I just noticed the theme for next year's conference, the subtitle I remember of Well Earth, Well People. What's the first part of the title? Something transformation? Or
You would think one of us would remember.
we must have had an exchange of probably 50 emails on this thing.
Yeah.
And we can't.
Well, the connection to me, first we got
visionary turning.
Visionary turning, good. You get the points for memory.
Oh, thanks, Jack.
I think we have to take back the word wellness, if it's possible at this point, because it got cheapened in the 80s and 90s. From wellness pet food to, as James Miller said, they use it to sell hotel rooms in Europe, spas, the whole thing. It's gotten narrowed down from Dunn's original definition, which was spiritual, mental, emotional, physical. And to the extent we can reclaim that, that's important. And then the environmental piece of it, because if we don't see the connection with where the Earth is headed, and we're starting to now with the focus on global warming, which now everyone's trying to make a buck on that. So I think that's a major piece of it, and also the children, which Bill was carrying babies around here from the earliest memory I have. Your babies, now your grandchildren, and like you just related to the
Well, this
kid.
is one of my other kids. I didn't want to tell her.
Oh, okay.
This is Lola. She's a neighbor.
Uh-huh. So
They live in the house where you first came.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
So the children are our future. What if we really believe that? Because we don't act like that. The way we're treating kids now, we're creating extremely disconnected children. The exposure from a hospital birth to circumcision for boys, to there's less bottle feeding than there was, but it's still a high rate of it. There's controlled crying, they call it in Australia, sleep training, which is extremely destructive. All the evidence, there's no evidence to support any of the common parenting practices, and that's been my interest for the last 15 years. We've got to change how we treat children, or we're just going to create a worse and worse environment and more problems to deal with in wellness. So if we can't connect the earth, ourselves, and the kids together, we're not going to make it. And on that note, I'm going to pass it on to Bill.
Well, first of all, I won't argue with someone who said I had a good idea a long time ago. But I always thought you should be connecting to kids, and I remember giving keynotes here with a kid on my shoulders.
Yeah.
And I took kids every place I went, and I had executives never invite me back. Like Ford Motor, I remember I was in this conference room, where if you make a mistake, it's millions, And I had one of my kids with me, and they were playing quietly on the floor, and they were just like Lola. I mean, they were not a problem. And the guy, he was so upset, he couldn't even focus on what we were talking about because there was a kid in that room. And finally I said, are we going to talk about something that kids shouldn't know here? And that really sealed it. I was never invited back. But, let's talk about, again, I'm always accused by Ardell of talking too much about what Bob Allen said, and I want to let people know why. Bob he got so busy because he had all his other businesses going, then he got interested in this, prospective medicine stuff and behavior change when it talked about personal behavior. And sometimes when he couldn't go somewhere, he would ask me if I would go give the talk. And he gave me his slides, which I still have, and I would go and I'd listen to his tapes a couple times on the way, and I would pretty much say whatever he said, So Don kept saying, how do you know he said that? And I said, because I listened to the tapes about 20 times.
I thought he was making stuff up and giving it to Bob, like they used to do with Mark.
But I remember one of the last things that he impressed.
I hung out with Bob a lot, and I didn't hear him say these things.
Well, one of the most important things I remember toward the end of my time with Bob was he said the most important thing we have to focus on is peace. Mm-hmm. And now, if you see what is the risk for Lola and her kids, it's this craziness of fundamental religious belief that leads to terrorist activities, even with highly educated people, essentially willing to give up their lives in the name of what could be a Stone Age belief, and that the book that's in our bookstore here is called The End of Faith by Sam Harris. I highly recommend that book. And if you can catch some of the videos of Sam, which are floating around the internet, I recommend that. Yeah. But the other issue, this planetary issue, there's a guy who used to come here all the time before he died, Robert Keck, and one of his books was called Sacred Eyes. And there's a section of that book where he quotes people who were in outer space who look back at this planet from the perspective, and they're just amazing quotes. They're Russians, they're Saudis, they're Germans, they're Americans, and to a person, it fundamentally changed how they viewed what we should be doing. And it had to do with protecting this small blue planet, which is the only place we've found so far that will support our particular life form. They have not found any place else that has the right mix of what we need, and we're screwing it up. There is evidence that I believe to be true that we are screwing it up. So I think one of our challenges is to get people to start making that transition. And there were brilliant people writing about this when I first came out of med school. And Amory Lovins and Schumacher, who wrote Small is Beautiful. Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring.
That's what got me into it.
Yeah, so I've been asked to present at a Midwest environmental education conference that's coming up in October, and I'm going to repeat something I did here 6 years ago, which is the wellness of the world and the world of wellness. And there is a relationship because we as a species have the potential to screw it up for all the others. And that's a dangerous thing. There's other potential risks out there too, like a comet and other things that could happen again. But we've got real things we're doing that are measurably changing this planet. And one of my kids hiked to the top of Kilimanjaro. And if you look at the pictures, even 5 years ago that she took and compared it with what's out there now, it's already different. And this is not a good thing. This is a danger. So anyway, I'm going to go spend time with my grandchildren, and I sure appreciate the opportunity to share time with all these people and the people who come for the first time.
Do you have any more questions?
Yeah.
You know, just to answer your question there about where we're headed, when I really look at how all of this translates down into the way that people work with people in the healthcare field and in the wellness professional, I think the shift really is to be more of an ally, more of a true ally, instead of being a treatment provider. Treatment's fine. You know, if something needs treatment, great, wonderful. But I think the shift is to be more of an ally in this change process and truly getting it that lifestyle change is about behavior. So we're really helping someone to change behavior, and you need an ally through that process. It really is a process, not an event, you know, as Prochaska likes to say. And when we can really do that, it really requires us to be connected. And to me, coaching for connectedness and doing wellness work in whatever form you do to help people feel more connected to the world around them, to each other, to the sense of spirituality, to the natural world, so that they will value it enough to really protect it and be a champion for it. And to just have that connectedness that fights isolation, that fights loneliness, which we now see as a major, major health risk. To have that kind of connection that Jack is talking about, that we have with our children and with all the children around us and with somebody else's children. I mean, to me, that's a direction that I would just love to see this field and our whole society headed. I'd love to see that. I think we all would.
Hi, my name's Rod Lees and I come from Australia. I'm 61 going on 62, and I've sort of been trying to practice this stuff for a long time, but until about 12 months ago I didn't know you existed. And I didn't know this stuff existed other than what was in my head. I attended a session at QUT in Brisbane that Bob Boyd organised that Don Ardell spoke at. And at the end of that I picked up the Ardell Wellness Report and I started to read it, and it was just sensational stuff. And since that time Don and I kind of got a bit of a connection, and I subscribe to the newsletter, and he and I have interchanges on a reasonably regular basis. And I just suppose I just wanted to thank you all for what you've done. You know, and don't don't give it away just because we need you guys. So thank you very much.
Well, we're passing it on to you.
Hey, but I'm 60. I mean the
Australians and the Europeans.
There were some early leaders in Australia that were doing this kind of stuff. A guy came here in the mid-'70s named Brian Furness, Furnass, and he had helped write a book called The Magic Bullet, and the subtitle was The Social Implications and Limitations of Modern Medicine. And he came and visited a lot of our places in this country, and I've I don't know if you remember meeting with him. Did you meet with him? Anyway, then he went back and he ran the health service at the National University in Canberra. And I don't know what he's doing now, but he was an early leader. Yeah.
And then Grant Donovan.
And Grant Donovan then ran the first big conference out at Perth, and a couple of us had a chance to be involved in that. But before that, there was a guy in Geelong, near Melbourne, named Maury Rayner, who ran a wellness center. He kind of did what you did in Mill Valley. And but he got more involved in Australian rules football and other stuff like that, and so his wellness stuff kind of faded.
I live in Mullumbimby now.
I gotta go.